Okay, hello and welcome to today's Market Access series. The purpose of the Access series is really to help Queensland companies identify opportunities in the UK market, but also to explore some of the tactics and strategies that you might adopt in terms of accessing the market, either for the first time, so entering the UK market, or obviously for a continued growth and expansion. My name is Warren Bartlett. I'm the Trade and Investment Queensland's Deputy Commissioner based here in London and working for TIQ, or Trade and Investment Queensland Europe. We have a fairly small team here in Europe based in the UK. We cover pretty much the whole of Europe, focusing on the major economies as you would expect: Germany, France, and obviously the UK. Being based in the UK, it's fair to say it's probably our most familiar market. It's my absolute pleasure today to be hosting this session. And this session is the third in our series, the third webinar in our series, and will be focused on tendering opportunities in the public sector procurement framework arena in the UK. I'm also pleased to say that we are supported today by the UK government's Department of International Trade, and also a specialist tendering and bid management consultancy called Tenders AU. So thank you for both of those organisations. I'll introduce the respective speakers shortly. In terms of housekeeping for today, or for this session, sorry, we are expecting the session to run approximately an hour and 30, speaking content for probably just shy of 1 hour, leaving obviously the time at the end for discussion and Q&A. So during the speaking content, please do post any questions that you might have through the Q&A function in Zoom. I and my colleagues will be monitoring that, and we'll pick it up at the end and put those questions to the panel, including myself. And hopefully we can have a sort of open discussion and we can all share those insights. Also worth noting today, the session will be recorded and an email will be sent to all participants by way of follow-up. So, don't worry too much about sort of making notes, because it will all be there. There are also, our previous sessions are recorded as well. So when you receive the link, you can have a look at those if that's of interest. So as I said, we're based in the UK, and that means that we're probably most familiar with the market here. Obviously, the times here have been quite difficult. Given the COVID and the global pandemic situation, the UK has been impacted relatively hard, particularly in terms of the economy and sort of social considerations. We have, I guess, plummeted, is it fair to say, into a fairly deep recession as of last year. But the expectation is here in the UK that there will be a fairly robust and rapid bounce back, certainly in terms of the economy. That's sort of stimulated by a significant government spend last year and continuing this year, as outlined in the recent budget. In fact, it's an unprecedented government spend since the Second World War, I think. There's also a kind of renewed level of optimism here, which is good for your information, based on a fairly successful vaccine rollout so far. So there's a sort of business sentiment is picking up. We're finding that conversations are starting to take place now between sellers and buyers and vice versa, whereas probably towards the back end of last year they had slowed down somewhat. So optimism is here, I think. We're also approaching summer in the UK, which always helps. So there are significant opportunities here. I think there always have been, even during a recession. But I think now's a good time to be really thinking hard about the UK market and considering how you might approach and what tactics you might use. So on that note, I would like to hand over to Mark Donovan. So Mark is the Senior Business Relationship Manager at the UK Government's Department of International Trade. He's based out of Brisbane. He's part of, I think, a growing team of that DIT has in Brisbane now, and a much larger team across Australia. Department of International Trade are a very good ally to TIQ. They really do help us to help you, if you like, access markets. So Mark, over to you.
Thank you for that, Warren. Let me just bring up my presentation. There we go. So thank you again for the introduction, Warren, and for the opportunity to present at this event. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge and pay respect to the past, present and future traditional custodians and elders of this nation, and the continuation of cultural, spiritual, educational practices of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. Now, today I'd like to provide an introduction to who the UK's Department for International Trade are, why the UK, the services that we provide, and an overview of some of the key policies which will help to shape the UK market for years to come. So who are the Department for International Trade? Well, let's start at the very top. I'm sure you all recognise this individual here, it's the UK Prime Minister, Boris Johnson. This clip is taken from a light-hearted video where he's discussing the UK-Australia Free Trade Agreement, and really reinforces the fact that Australia is one of the UK's most important partners. Now, as you know, the UK has left the EU and is now undertaking free trade agreement negotiations between the UK and Australia. These are now in round 4, and whilst I'm unable to say much about those discussions, I can state that both sides are committed to reaching an ambitious and comprehensive agreement. Now, directly reporting to the Prime Minister is the Honourable, Right Honourable Elizabeth Truss MP, Secretary of State for International Trade and President of the Board of Trade. I just really wanted to provide you with a quote today, which helps to really lay out the remit for the Department for International Trade. So the DIT is at the heart of this government's ambitions to seize the opportunities of being a free trading nation and becoming a truly global Britain, whilst levelling up our country and delivering prosperity for all. Our departmental mission remains clear: to encourage, equip and enable British exporters to drive inward investment, to forge trade deals and to open up markets around the world, and to champion free trade on the global stage. Now, the reason I open up with those 2 slides is just to reinforce the strategic importance that the UK government does have at the very top levels for the work that the Department for International Trade undertakes. So now that we've clarified the remit, we can now discuss on how we meet those requirements. Now, whilst the Department for International Trade has representatives all around the world, my role is particularly focused here in Queensland. And within our department, we have 2 main areas. First of all is trade. So trade represents us assisting UK companies to bring over their technologies and techniques into Queensland and establishing a presence here and then employing locally as they expand. And second is investment. So here we're looking at assisting Queensland companies just like yourselves to establish a UK base and then access Europe and America from there. And we recognise that trade between Queensland companies and the UK is often an early step in the investment journey, and we do coordinate with TIQ, who are there for your UK trade-related support. And when the time is right for your company to establish a site in the UK, that's where the Department for International Trade can then step in and provide assistance. So before we talk about the assistance that we do provide, first let's look at why the UK. I'm sure that you're all aware of the UK as a trade destination. However, I wanted to go through 5 main points regarding establishing a presence in a company over in the UK. So first of all, the world's 5th largest economy. You get easy access to customers, product innovators, suppliers and partners. The UK is the #1 in Europe for inward foreign direct investment. And in 2019, the UK's GDP was almost $4 trillion US. As a comparison, Australia at the time was about 1.8 US trillion. And also to help try and compare the 2 markets, population-wise, the UK was 66.7 million, and the population of Australia was about 26.1. So you can see there is a significant difference there between the 2. Benefiting from low business costs, you're able to pay the lowest corporation tax in the G20 at 19%. And with the recent budget announcements, this will be going up to 25% by 2023. However, that will still remain the lowest in the G7, and that will be applied in a tapered measure. The UK average labour costs are the most competitive in Western Europe. You can get generous tax relief on research and development at either 25 or 33%, depending if you're profit or loss making. There's also the patent box, where companies can apply for a reduced rate of corporation tax of just 10% on profits earned from patented inventions and other intellectual property. Access to a large innovative ecosystem. Well, the UK is one of the world's largest technology ecosystems, with thousands of tech startups built around a strong entrepreneurial culture. And it's also, according to the Global Innovation Index, one of the top 4 most innovative places in the world. Well-connected infrastructure. Now, obviously, COVID has impacted this at the moment, but there will be a reality post-COVID. We got super fast broadband, first of all, extended to 95% of premises within the UK. And then we have a large integrated system with over 70 airports, 40 major ports, excellent rail links, toll-free motorways. And the UK is a great combination of infrastructure to be able to move goods and people quickly, not just around the country, but also internationally in simple and cost-effective ways. And finally, access a highly skilled workforce, very important when you're looking to try and set up and establish a presence over in the UK. There's currently a labour force there of 32 million people, which is the second largest within the EU. The UK is home to 8 of the top 10 universities in Europe and 4 of the top 10 in the world. The UK ranks 3rd in the world for brain gain, which is a measure of success of attracting talented people from across the world. And the UK is also 2nd most popular study destination worldwide. So now that I've sold you on why the UK, the next level is, well, what are the support services that the Department for International Trade can provide for you when the time is right? So first of all, support with visas. We're able to explain how the UK visa system works and provide information and guidance on the different types of visas available. We've got visa specialists who can also help businesses to understand how to bring across skilled workers to the UK from overseas. Recruiting staff. We will advise companies on the most effective recruitment routes using our knowledge of recruitment agencies and contact at top universities. And we can also direct companies towards government programs and funding that support workforce training. Assessing market opportunity. So here we can help business access and quantify market opportunities in the UK and really make sure they target the right channel for growth. Helping to select the best location. We can help companies identify the right locations for your businesses and organise visits as well post-COVID, so you can compare different options. Industry expertise. We can connect you to our industry experts within the UK so you can understand more about the actual sector you're moving into and understand the best way to service suppliers, centres of research and development, tax setting up and banking information. So ourselves and our partners can help explain how the tax system affects business and how to benefit from the various incentives and allowances that are on offer and get set up and established, but also ongoing support. So once you're there, support as a trade client into other markets and areas. Now, this is a useful visualization of the key activities required to be able to go across and set yourself up in the UK. The timescales there are indicative, but they give a good indication of what would be required in that particular order. Now, I want to touch on 2 main points, and I'm just conscious of time. I won't go into much detail, but COP26, you may have heard of it. So this year is the 26th United Nations Climate Change Conference of the parties, hence COP26. It's scheduled to be held in Glasgow in November, and it's under the presidency of the United Kingdom. The key thing I wanted to really mention here is the fact that the UK is really working towards these sort of 5 priority areas, and there'll be a lot of money and a lot of time and effort is going to be spent towards initiatives around that going forward. And that brings us on to the next slide, which is our 10-point plan. So the 10-point plan for the Green Industrial Revolution, again, released in November, it's going to use £12 billion of government investment and potentially 3 times as much of that from the private sector. The ambition is to support our 250,000 green jobs in the industry there. So I'm not going to go through all those, but there is a useful link at the bottom there where you can read more about the actual 10-point plan itself and the individual initiatives. But the reason why I have these 2 slides here is just to really reinforce the fact that there's going to be a lot of investment in these areas, and that means there's going to be a lot of opportunity going forward as well. So my time is almost up, so thank you very much to Warren and the TIQ team for the opportunity to present today and provide a quick introduction to the UK's Department for International Trade and why the UK, the support we can provide, and some of the key policies that are really going to help shape the UK for years to come. And again, representing potential opportunities for Queensland companies in the future. So when the time is right for you and your company, please do reach out and we can discuss how the DIT can assist and get you over to the UK so you can grow your company internationally. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, excellent context setting there. Couple of points we're going to pick up on. I think you've touched on the free trade agreement. Obviously, that's a significant, potentially significant impact there. Brexit sort of ties in with that as well. There's quite a sort of dynamic environment here at the moment. And I'd also really like to point out you touched on, I think, the service you provide about assessing market opportunity. So that plays quite nicely into the role of TIQ and a lot of work that we do. And absolutely, I can agree with you there that DIT have a fantastic resource here, and it's absolutely worth tapping into in terms of understanding what the market looks like, who the stakeholders are, what the competitive landscape is. So that's really helpful, I think, for any company considering coming in. And also, of course, the practical advice in terms of setting up, very similar to the advice that we provide to UK companies coming into Queensland, but it's absolutely very important. So again, thanks, Mark. That's really helpful. Okay, Okay, so next up, I'm going to introduce David in a minute. So the purpose of this session really is to do a deep dive into tendering and procurement opportunities, particularly in the public sector here in the UK. David Anderton is the strategic bid director at a specialist bid management consultancy called Tenders AU. It's actually a UK business that David took over to Queensland a couple of years ago, I think probably 2019 maybe, to establish and to do exactly this really, to service Queensland and Australian businesses looking to tender for large-scale opportunities in the UK. It's not confined to the public sector, but I think for today's session, we're looking mostly at public sector opportunities. David has a wealth of experience, over 25 years in tendering and bid management across a whole variety of sectors, retail, advanced manufacturing, you name it. There's not much that David doesn't know about tendering, so I think we're very fortunate to have his input today. And from conversation with David earlier, he's basically going to step you through the process from, sort of from start to finish. So it will be quite detailed. As I said, we do have a recording, so I think it's going to be an excellent reference point as well to pick up on. So really, without further ado, David, I'm just again conscious on time. I'll hand over to you. Off you go. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Yes, I'm David Anderton, Strategic Bid Director for Tenders AU. And yeah, the purpose of my presentation is to start with maybe identifying opportunities and methods that you can perhaps use outside of the UK. So if you're looking at Australian tenders, you can apply the same methods for identifying opportunities, but apply the methods to actually create compelling winning tender responses, but the focus is predominantly the UK. So I'm just going to share my screen. So I'm based on the Sunshine Coast, but formerly I was with Tenders UK, who are the most successful bid management firm in Europe, where they provide consultancy services to win specifically UK and European public sector contracts. In the last 12 months, they won £6.2 billion and are the most successful bid management firm in Europe. And you're right, Warren, we started speaking, I think it was around 3 years ago, but we founded Tenders AU 2 years ago on the Sunshine Coast in Queensland. And I suppose looping back to the free trade agreement, it was that originally that generated our interest in Australia, to act as a conduit almost to provide that level of advice and insight to the UK tendering market and to provide opportunities or enable opportunities to win these contracts. The world changed a lot in 2020. International trade was halted, so we focused more so in the last 12 months on Australian tenders. But as the world starts to come to terms with the pandemic and allows for international trade, we are moving back towards looking at UK opportunities. So in the last 12 months, since inception, about 18 months ago, we won $422 million in Australia, and overall we win around 4 out of 5. So I'm going to go through hopefully from kind of opportunity identification through to winning tenders in quite some detail. There will be some hyperlinks, or there are some hyperlinks to my presentation. So when the document is shared with you, feel free to use that to navigate around public procurement in the UK and to find opportunities. So the UK public procurement, for the government, they spend £292 billion a year on buying goods and services from external suppliers, and this amounts to around a third of public expenditure. The money is spent on everything from goods such as stationery and medicine, through to construction of services, of schools and roads, the daily delivery of back office functions such as information technology, human resources, and frontline services such as probation and social care. The overriding public procurement policy, which is very identical to any procurement policies in Australia also, is the overriding requirement is that public procurement must be based on value for money, which is defined as the best mix of quality and effectiveness for the least outlay, so for the least cost over the period of the goods and services bought, should be achieved through competition, unless there are compelling reasons to the contrary. And that quote, the best mix of quality and effectiveness for the least outlay, it reappears later on in this presentation, so it's worth making a note of this or coming back to it at a later date. So all public sector contracts across the UK over £10,000 are listed on the Contracts Finder site. And my first link for Contracts Finder takes you to the government site where you can see all opportunities. You can also click to Public Contracts Scotland, Sell to Wales, eSource in Northern Ireland. And as of yesterday, when I was pulling together this presentation, there were 1,753 live opportunities. They also have a new search tool called Find a Tender. This was actually developed to replace Tenders Electronic Daily. So as the UK departed Europe on the 31st at 11 p.m, Find a Tender went live. It's very similar to Contract Finder. The difference is it searches for opportunities over £122,976. I presume there's some sort of euro conversion that probably would bring it to around 150,000 euros. So Find a Tender is another alternative, and this is how the opportunity search looks. In the keywords, I didn't put anything in because I was trying to find everything. And you can see on the left-hand side, using opportunity search, opportunity show with consultancy services, detail around the requirement, the notice type, the expiry date, the publication, and in some cases the value. On the right-hand side, there's 3 opportunities. This is around contract awards, so you can search quite simply to see the opportunities were awarded, what the contract was for, how much the contract was awarded for, and who to. It's quite a valuable tool, good for seeking out your competition. The UK is very transparent mainly because of the public contract regulations 2015, so PCR 2015. This detail is regularly updated. When you use those tools and click on future opportunities and early engagements, you're able to see a range of opportunities, some that might be imminent and others that might be in the pipeline for 12 or 6 months or beyond. So you've got a City of London external auditing opportunity. There's many. I've just nominated 3 to show you the system working. They're looking to appoint a suitable organisation to act as an external auditor. This will include elements such as auditing its financial statements and carrying out certification of various grant claims and returns. There's a £12 million contract. I think from memory, it was over 3 or 4 years. MSE Group Procurement Consultancy, there was an opportunity to form a partnership with a prospective supplier of procurement and related services to improve, I always look for certain words, to improve MSE's operations and to provide a PCR, so public contract regulations compliant route to market for the wider NHS and public sector to access relevant services. And there was no value disclosed for that opportunity. And the Department for International Trade are buying PR agency services. The procurement of a new agency for PR services is vital to the successful execution of a more retail style of campaigning as a means to create attention and build momentum around the present opportunity for national growth via exporting. It's quite an interesting opportunity. So in the UK, you have Find a Tender and Contracts Finder to seek opportunities. When you find an opportunity, it then diverts you to the buyer's page. It could be a council, it could be a local clinical commissioning group. A major buyer in the UK is the Crown Commercial Service, which is part of the Cabinet Office. They play an important role helping the UK public sector save money. And are the biggest public sector procurement organisation in the UK. They use their commercial expertise to help buyers in central government and across the public and third sectors to purchase everything from low conductors and energy. The collective purchasing of customers means we can get the best commercial deals in the interests of taxpayers. So they don't specifically buy goods that are maybe one-offs or perhaps aren't used or purchased very often. It's more commonly bought services. So it could be stationery, it could be low conductors through recruitment, or it could be security services and man guarding possibly, or software or IT services. They publish commercial agreements for more complex requirements, for example, for buying a fleet of vehicles or for legal services, and they call them frameworks. So in Australia, it's commonly referred to as a panel. In the UK, it's referred to as a framework. A framework comprises a description of common public sector requirements, a list of suppliers who have been evaluated as capable of delivering the requirements, and standardised contract terms. Frameworks are often divided into lots, typically by products or services. It can be segregated by regions, by geography. So on the CCS site, and I recommend that that you search the site. It contains a lot of information. There's a lot of information around existing frameworks, and you can see who the existing providers are on that framework. So it gives you some good intelligence. It can tell you when that framework might be renewed, and I think you can see how much they are spending through that framework. The area that I focus on is upcoming deals, because it shows what's coming up. It's not always updated. That they do update the CCS website all the time, but they don't always put new data or new dates in the CCS opportunities if there's no real change. So they contain all the current, planned and future pipeline opportunities. So here we've got an opportunity for sustainable and circular technology, working with cross-government stakeholders, including the STAR, which is the Sustainable Technology Advice and Reporting Group, led by DEFRA. We'll be reviewing our commercial approach to support delivery of sustainable technology strategy and effectively cradle-to-grave sustainable technology use. Procurement likely is to focus on extending the life, useful life of devices and reuse, as well as effective end-of-life disposal contracts. So in here, you've got some detail around 18th of March. It looks like there might be some further updates to come for that one. Big data, analytics and insight, innovative and cost-effective ways of processing large volumes of data by providing a data management solution through the data life cycle. This will include capturing and storing data, accessing data, and analyzing data. It's a 2-year agreement on the horizon, with the possibility to extend by a further 2 years. Extensions normally suggest that the framework is operating as it should, and that the providers are delivering to the requirement and the buyers getting value for money. Food. This agreement will deliver a UK-wide SME inclusive food procurement service for public sector food buyers. It will address government policy in the following areas: improve food security, improve transparency and provenance and accountability within food supply chains, improve performance on energy, waste, social and environmental factors of food production, reduce diet-related disease burden, boost regional economies in every region of the UK, and improve and reduce cost for the public purse, value for money. Market engagement. A prior information notice has been recently published. We'll be hosting engagement workshops to discuss the scope and approach in more detail and gather your valued feedback and input to ensure we meet customer needs to deliver commercial benefits. So at the moment, they're defining their specification and are looking to engage with providers to make sure that the specification, which in Australia is referred mostly as the scope of the works, is that it's fit for purpose and it's going to deliver the outcomes that they want. Communications marketplace, specialized agency services and marketing, communications, media strategy, and planning events and creative and content development. Framework replaces an existing framework which is in place, which expires January 2022. We'll have further customer engagement sessions to get feedback on the current framework agreement. These sessions will be made to make sure we are best in class marketplace for our customers. Contract notice is going to be issued on OJU, which is the official journal for Europe, July 2021. It will also appear on Find a Tender. Green energy switch. The agreement will supply fixed price energy contracts from multiple suppliers. RM6166 will offer a comprehensive range of managed services, including procurement support, bill validation, budget reporting, contract management, query management, price benchmarking, carbon reporting, advice on reducing your energy demands. Now, there's quite a lot of information I've just given to you over 6 or 7 slides, but these frameworks are bought in significant value. So they're broken down in lots through services and products. It might be when if there's an interested party looking at this, that you can see an area that you're interested in. Budget reporting for green energy switch or procurement support. These frameworks are commonly bought services. This framework might be worth £20 billion, and breaking it down into individual lots mean they can be very specific about solving problems. Remember at the beginning I said value for money is defined as the best mix of quality and effectiveness for the least outlay. So I'm going to show you now how we go about winning tenders. I'm going to show you how a buyer calculates a price score in most cases, and how a buyer calculates your quality score. So you find an opportunity, you register, you make sure that you are relevant. Perhaps you work with Department for International Trade and maybe collaborate with Trade and Investment Queensland to make sure, if you're not already in the UK, that you have a registered address, a VAT number, a DUNS number, so that you're eligible. When it comes to actually working on a tender, you need to understand that the UK is quite transparent in the way that they evaluate tenders, which means you can understand how your tender might be evaluated before you submit it, which means you can actually influence the outcome of your tender. And I'll show you this. So the most common evaluation in the UK is referred to as MEET. It's the most economically advantageous tender. For example, for a tender assessment, they might award 60% towards quality, and 40% of the overall assessment is based on price. Combined, it equals 100%. Occasionally, there might be something else. There could be a presentation that contributes 10% possibly. So the figures would still add up to 100%, but be broken down slightly differently. An example of how they calculate price, if they're not using the lump sum method, which is just a fixed price, they calculate and pro rata the price score. So I've produced 2 examples here. Bidder A submits a price of 1 million. Bidder B submits a price of 1.2 million. So they're more expensive. The price calculation is, in this example, 40% of the overall assessment for price is available. The cheapest bid, the cheapest compliant bid, and that's a keyword, compliant, receives 40% for price. The bidder B, who isn't the cheapest, is £200,000 more expensive, is calculated, has their score prorated against the cheapest bid. So in this case, the the cheapest bid is 1 million, bidder B is 1.2 million. They divide 1 million by 1.2, I think it comes out at 0.83. You multiply it by 40, which is the available score for price, and then it shows that they would get 33% awarded for price. And it's important to understand that impact, because if the tender was 90% quality or 8% quality, which can happen in the NHS or in services where the best quality is paramount, the impact of price is lessened. Equally, if it's the other way around, if it's 70% price, then the impact of not being the cheapest is more significant. So how they calculate quality? Now, if you're familiar with bidding in Australia or anywhere else, you'll see that buyers use questions to determine the quality score. They can use presentations to contribute to the quality score. In the UK, it's standardised for every tender that meets the thresholds that we mentioned earlier, that you have to complete a standard supplier questionnaire, often abbreviated to SSQ. And it's very standardised. It's company address, details, VAT number, DUNS number, usually three contract examples, and it may contain some self-cleaning questions, which could be, has a director ever committed fraud? And if you say I don't know, it's over a certain period, if you say yes, then you're not allowed to bid. Self-cleaning. Scored questions, which is how they determine the 60%, are usually weighted by importance to the overall score. So a buyer will create an evaluation panel compliant with mandated by the Public Contract Regulation 2015, and they're required to be transparent. This means they're mandated to disclose how they will assess how a bidder responds to the questions. So you may have seen, although it's not quite so prevalent, scoring tables in Australia. In every tender that meets the threshold in the UK, buyers have to disclose the scoring table with the tender documents, so you understand how a buyer is evaluating. Usually marked out of 5, it could be marked out of 10, it could be marked out of 100. It's worth reviewing what score is required to provide a full answer and what is required to score 5 or whatever the top mark is, because they're not always the same. And I'll show you. So I've found an example question. It could be any tender, it could be a tender in Australia, but this one is one from the UK. It's a question. The council is keen to understand how the bidder will embed genuine and transformational social value in the delivery of the proposed works, and what benefits their solution will offer in respect to improving employment opportunities, such as apprenticeships, jobs for long-term unemployed, and targeted training, and how this approach can positively impact local residents. And also in this question, please confirm how you regularly report to the council your successes in embedding social value into your proposed solution. So, relatively complex question. If you break it down, there's maybe 8 or 9 elements to it. And the buyer is mandated to achieve value for money, so that we'll award extra marks for providers who go further. The table that I'm about to share with you might differ from buyer to buyer. The key to success, and what I do on a daily basis, is understanding what the buyer wants and figuring out what is answering the question and what exceeds the requirement. So looking at the scoring table and reviewing it and thinking, right, if I provide a a full compliant response to this, if I answer all the questions, what score do I get, and what extra do I need to do to have a chance of scoring a top mark? That should influence the content you write. It certainly influences my content. So there's a scoring table. I've highlighted what I see as being some of the key criteria to identify where a response would sit, so where a question that you're responding to would sit post-evaluation. But remember, this is actually shared without my yellow highlights. This is shared with the tender documents. So you can see a 3 is classed as capable, satisfies the requirement, demonstration by the bidder of the relevant ability, understanding, experience, skills, resources, and quality measures required to provide the supplies and services. So to me, I look at that and think, right, if I provide a solid response that answers the question, I score a 3. So what do I need to look at to understand the importance of the question, looking at the specification to score 4 or 5? So the difference here to move from a 3 to a 4 is satisfies the requirement with minor additional benefits. So they're talking about additional benefits as being a differentiator. They're also we're also drawn to the response offers demonstrated evidence and examples in support. So evidencing a response, so answering the question in full, evidence in the response, and showing some minor additional benefits would score 4. Looking at a 5, or seeking to be awarded a 5, you need to exceed the requirements. And they define it as exceptional demonstration by the bidder of the relevant ability, understanding, experience, skills, resources, and quality measures required to provide the supplies and services. Response offers multiple demonstrated evidence and examples in support. And if you look at the difference between a 5 and a 4, the response offers multiple evidence and examples, and it's showing that you exceed the requirements. So that should influence how you write. It should influence how you respond to a question, and that will influence the outcome. Very transparent. So with tendering anywhere around the world, can you copy and paste your previous best bid? Can you bid on compliance only? So going back to the scoring table, if you provide a compliant only response and don't seek to offer added value or innovation, depending on the question that you're asked and the context of the bid, you can do that. You can do that, but I would advise against it. Buyers often state they do not want generic content, and always have that scoring table in mind. Will you win? You could. If every bidder applies the same level of commitment to the bid, you could still win. If there's 5 bids for managed IT services or food security or the circular economy, and every bid copies and pastes, every bidder copies and pastes the previous content, you could still win. If a bidder provides a strategic bid, you're probably not going to. So I'd recommend against it. So in the UK, the buyers are required to provide at least 25 days from a tender being released to the submission deadline. It's quite deliberate. Again, it's mandated by the Public Contract Regulations 2015. It's deliberate to help the SMEs enter the market. So large companies may have bid management teams, may have resources where they can commit. They can commit to a project. SMEs that maybe employ 20 people or 50 people might not have the luxury, so they allow extra time for SMEs to engage. My advice is that if you see tenders that are released very early on, you can set up notifications on Find a Tender or Contract Finder, or if you want to subscribe to a paid portal, you can do that. My advice would be to always make no bid decisions within 5 days. It means that you you've got a good solid 4 weeks, or maybe 3 weeks to work on your response. The time is given to allow bidders to read and understand tender documents, consider your response. The buyer wants value for money. They want to make sure that the tender process isn't prohibitive to time poor SMEs. There's a new target, I think it might be being introduced this year, that 35% of UK spending is to be through SMEs. So there's a big movement. It was 25%, now it's moving towards 35%. They want SMEs to deliver contracts. So you might wonder why there's a random photo of Coles. It could be any other supermarket. And it's an analogy that I often use. Buyers have freedom to buy what they need to solve a problem. Tender documents will often identify to the reader what the solution is. Usually the specification that they're designed, maybe they've spent 2 or 3 months pulling that specification, or in Australia, scope of the works. But they don't tell you what the problem is. They don't want to admit that. Every buyer has a problem. When I go to the shopping, when I was in the UK, if I went to a supermarket, Tesco, Sainsbury's, Aldi, or over here in Australia, when I go to Coles, Woolworths, I don't fill my trolley up with things that I don't need. I buy what I want, what I need. And buyers are the same. They have freedom to buy what they need within confines of the budget and public contract regulations. So I'll give you some examples of identifying through language that's used in documents to provide a more meaningful solution. So understanding when you go to a supermarket, you want to buy rice because you haven't got rice. You might buy gluten-free flour because you may be gluten intolerant, or you might buy a particular item. And buyers are often the same. They mention or they highlight issues deliberately, or sometimes maybe by mistake. So reading documents and seeing the language that's used, and this one I've highlighted here. This is was for face-to-face interpretations concerning the welfare of children or young adults, and it is expected that the same interpreter be provided on an ongoing basis where possible for this vulnerable group. This was in a tender from a couple of years ago. So we identified that through the documents the language used was quite sympathetic. The solution that we came up with after seeing Operation Hydrant, so we did some research. There was this new investigation that started in 2015 for the contract that I mentioned a moment ago. It required interpreters and translators to travel to hospital on demand, sometimes traveling 300 miles to site for minority languages and back. And over that period, the translators would go into hospital and providing translation service or interpretation service for children to speak with doctors or clinicians. So the contract required interpreters and translators to travel to hospital on demand, sometimes 300 miles. We noticed that through the travel cost, the buyer was very concerned, travel distance, the buyer was very concerned about cost. And also they were very concerned about the vulnerable group. So we designed a delivery model within 30 miles, employing NHS nurses to get care faster to the children in need of support. As a consequence of doing that, we also met the buyer's agenda which was to save 40% of the contract value. So another example, using the research method, so identifying language and researching maybe what's happening. This particular example, the buyer, which was actually the Ministry of Defence, the authorities limiting, this is in the 10 documents, the authorities limiting the distance or driving time that a boat can be transported by road or sea. 6 hours driving time by road for a road transportable craft, or 200 miles transit distance by sea, except for yachts where the transit distance shall be within 50 miles of the boat's location. So there's some clear bias towards time and concern and limiting. Through research, we could see the buyer didn't want highly classified, very expensive, sensitive vehicles transported in the public for long periods of time. Every mile travelled was a risk, and we saw meeting minutes where that was described. A solution that we came up with was designing a delivery model using a hub and spoke method, in the centre of the contract. So we looked at all the locations. We centred our site on a convenient location that minimised travel of these vehicles. Obviously, that would have been there would have been some capital investment in that. To do that, our client agreed, and they won the contract. So we're thinking differently. We know the scoring table commonly used. It varies. The language varies. Because the UK has it is densely populated. It's also densely populated by businesses. The buyers can buy most services through a number of providers, so they challenge the market through competition to provide extra. So an extra doesn't need to be an investment in a new location. It doesn't need to be recruiting NHS nurses. It could be providing data. It could be providing eyes and ears on the ground for maybe a man guarding contract on a sensitive property. It can be whatever the tender is buying that either is directly relevant or something that you can offer within the means of your organisation or your submission, but it has to be relevant to the question to count towards that scoring table. I remember seeing a tender probably about 5 or 6 years ago, where it was around, the question was added value. The whole question was, please describe how you're going to provide added value. And the question, the response that I saw contained 27 added values. Nothing was explained. Explain the response and make it very relevant to the question. So to summarise, spend time understanding the opportunities or seeking them out. Research buying drivers for when you found one. Some of the language that I highlighted earlier, best in class. I would look there and think, why are they talking about best in class? What's happened there? Is it because the framework is maybe quite stale now and they're replacing it with a modern framework, or has something happened? And then when you draft content to answer questions, address the question, reading the scoring table at all times, and just make sure you underpin it with research. And the best advice that I can give you is, if you are unsuccessful, and everybody who tend, or everybody I've come across, every company I've come across is unsuccessful, review the scoring outcomes. They'll give you feedback, scores that you received. If it's not detailed enough, ask for more feedback and build that into a continuous improvement cycle. Most of methods that I described can be used. You can apply the methods to any tender around the world. Every buyer has a problem. Identify the problem and deliver the solution.
Thanks, David. Yeah, fantastic detailed explanation. They're really, really helpful. I particularly liked the comments you made about the score. Sorry, I'm just referring to my notes, but particularly about the scoring process. Really interesting. You know, it's not all about price. It's about understanding that balance between price and quality. But those examples you showed really helped understand how, you know, I think we quite often do default to price being the big issue. So that was really helpful and brought it to life with some good examples at the end there. And I think what you were saying about, I guess more generally, competition. You know, the market here is of a significant scale, but it's also very busy. So there are lots of players. So you know, in trying to differentiate, and this is a conversation we have quite frequently with Queensland exporters, who you know often have some great solutions and really innovative. And I think it's about what's the value add. You know, the question isn't is there a market for my product often, because usually the answer is yes. I think it's you know, how can I differentiate and how can I add value? And it seems to me that that's a key point in the tendering process, you know, and why would it be any different, I guess. But yeah, you really brought that home. So that was really helpful. Okay, so we've got a few questions. I'm sort of consolidating them. So I'll just read them from my notes here. And I'll add a bit into my content as well. So I think, as we've just discussed, I was just mentioning, we often see Queensland companies, you know, really successful. Some will enter the market physically, others won't, and it's often a needs-must type decision. Just, I suppose, a question from a tendering perspective. You covered off, and it's understood certainly by me that in most cases, if not all cases, a Queensland company, sorry, would need to have a registered legal entity of some description in the UK in order probably to satisfy the basic eligibility criteria for procurement, particularly the public sector. But you know, in your view, and I appreciate possibly the answer to this question would vary depending on the nature of the business and the tender. But in your view, is it necessary or advisable for those businesses to have sort of boots on the ground, so to speak, at the time of tendering? Or I'm just thinking about, you know, convincing of being able to deliver, but also building those relationships outside of the procurement that might be important. An element of that we can probably help with at TIQ because we are on the ground, but it'd be good to just get your view on that. And I think, sorry, sort of two questions in one, but the other side of that is if a company then is successful in winning a tender, or let's say successful in entering into a procurement framework, does it then become even more important for them to have people here? Because I guess that in most cases, being successful in the framework is obviously important, but it's only part of the story. You've then got to be positioned to capture, you know, the bigger slice of the pond, if you sorry, of the pool, basically, if that makes the pie. Yeah. So that makes sense. Sort of two questions in one.
Yeah. So the supplier, the standard supplier questionnaire does have the self-cleaning questions. You can, in some cases, bid without a VAT number, maybe without a registered office, but I feel like the cost of those at the very basics are very minimal.
Yeah.
And buyers, every buyer around the world, especially with the world as it is now, will want to know of that £20 million contract, of that £500,000 contract, how much of that money, how much of the margin stays in the country. So I would recommend always having some sort of local presence. It doesn't necessarily need to be a boots on the ground. I would say that the more important thing would be to have to maybe be relevant to the UK, and it could be that you identify the UK as a target market, you identify maybe a buyer that you want to work with, and you have some, depending on the service, maybe you provide a free trial of something to them. So when it comes to writing responses, evidence in each response in a particular way, or describing it in a particular way always sounds better if it's local and relevant. Buyers are risk adverse. If it's a new opportunity that or a new framework, there's no incumbents. But if there are incumbents on a contract, if you're looking to bid on a £20 million security contract, you need to show to the buyer that that you're still a low risk option, because you've got to unseat that incumbent.
Okay. And sorry, just on that point. So again, this is something else that comes up quite frequently in our conversations with our Queensland export clients. It's particularly with new entrants. So sometimes it's difficult to, or impossible to demonstrate, sort of like I guess credibility, or to try and address some of those risk averse the traces of risk averse that kind of exist in some buyers is difficult if you don't have an established market here. So is it appropriate for Queensland companies in their bids to a UK sort of tender to be referencing the great work they're probably doing in other markets, not least obviously the domestic market in Queensland or Australia? Because I suppose if it's presented properly and comprehensively, then it should, I would imagine, work positively. I mean, I think the risk sometimes is referencing what in Australia would be considered, would be known entities, referencing them here when they're perhaps not known. That's a slightly different thing. So I think that's why it's got to be a comprehensive, why it's, if you have a case study, you've got to kind of really explain why it's a big deal. You can't just assume that the UK entity, buying entity, will know who that particular business is that you might be referencing, for example.
So when it comes to tendering, especially certainly in the UK, your tender submission is final. They're not allowed to go on Google and search for you. They're not allowed to have any pre-assumptions. So everything you put in that document has to be your submission and your chance at that contract. There is a method, which is maybe, if you are a new entrant to the UK, is explaining why you're relevant. So what you bring, what it might be that a business is working on, a groundbreaking innovation in Australia, and the buyer in the UK doesn't know, because they only know what they know. So demonstrating that they're bringing something innovative or market leading to the UK and saying why it's relevant, that would be the argument. You can also, in most tenders, submit a variant bid. So if a buyer maybe is asking questions that perhaps could rule you out, or maybe show that you lack, or maybe show a lacking in UK experience, you could raise a clarification during the clarification period, which exists on all tenders, and ask, if it's not clear in the documents, how to submit a variant bid. So a variation to the specification, because the buyer may have built that specification only knowing what they know. And perhaps they don't know that there's some incredible Queensland companies with best-in-class communication systems, or whatever it might be.
Okay, no, that's a really good point. And then the sort of final point and question, I suppose, is around the more generally the approach to tendering. So, I mean, TIQ Europe, I think we see this as an approach which should be considered as part of a broader, market entry or market growth strategy. So it's one of several approaches. But I think, like with everything, there are sort of quick wins, and there are perhaps more considered. I mean, where do you think this would sit? I mean, it strikes me that this is, if a business is considering this, for the perhaps early stage or for the first time, it's something that does need to be thought through in terms of, is a willingness to invest both time and money to some extent in this approach, because it strikes me it's a very tangible and productive route, but it's not something you can just jump into and expect, you know, to happen particularly quickly without significant input.
Yeah.
So I don't know on your I mean, you know, I'm not necessarily asking you to quantify, you know, how much it costs and how long it takes, but just I mean, and any comments on that in terms of, you know, short-term versus long-term approach would be helpful.
I suppose most businesses would have a business development function,
Yeah.
and that business development function might be 1 to 20 people, and each person would carry a cost.
Yeah.
And I suppose that maybe the way to consider tendering and investing in a tender team, investing in time and effort, what could be the reward? If you gave a business development manager or director a series of targets, it might be 1 million, might be 2 million in Australia. I don't know can't remember what it would be in the UK, but depending on the service or the company you're working for, but tendering is a very viable business development function, and it can lead to some great outcomes. It can quickly help you navigate to a buyer. You're engaging directly with a buyer that maybe traditionally you wouldn't have access to. If the NHS put out a tender for clinical psychology, when you start to go through the procurement process, you have opportunities not to advertise, but you are alerting them to your company through clarification processes. You can ask intelligent questions, and the buyer would suddenly be aware of you. So it's just time. It's the time taken that it might take 6 months. It might take one tender, and you could win £500,000, £20 million, or whatever it might be, depending on what sector you're buying into or bidding into.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's really helpful. I think that's what I kind of meant when I used the word tangible. I mean, yeah, you can. There's a specific opportunity or opportunities. There are individuals that are across that. You know, so a lot of the BD work in entering a new market is taken up in finding those opportunities and those people. At least that bit is done. Yeah. Okay. No, look, that's really helpful. So thanks again, David, and thanks to Mark as well for his contribution. I'm just conscious of time. I think we probably need to wrap up now. As I've said, this is a recording, so this will be available for future reference, which is great. In addition to the thanks, I think there's just a few takeaway points, I suppose, by way of summary. I think I'd just like to run through. So I think one key one is that the UK is open for business still. You know, it arguably has been all the way through the recent difficult times, but there's an optimism now, and I think a belief that the economy will bounce back. So that's something definitely to be aware of in Queensland when you're looking at this market. As I've said, the UK is sort of coming out cautiously of a national lockdown. And I think that's playing into a more positive business sentiment, which is good. In terms of the public sector procurement, you know, lots there to think about from David and to refer back to, I think. But it strikes me that it's something that, you know, does require some input, and I think it can provide real outcomes and real tangible opportunities. So definitely something to be worth considering. And I'd encourage you to reach out to David, or you can do that via us. If you want a more sort of one-to-one initial consultation, just to explore how things might work for your business and what might be required and what the opportunities are, obviously, because David's quite happy to help with that. And so I think they're probably the key things. So the next thing for me to say is, again, thank you for everyone for joining in and watching the recordings. Thank you to the speakers. Thanks for TIQ colleagues for putting this together. And just for a final note, just to watch out the next series, the next event in the series, if you like. So webinar 4 will be on the 30th of March, and that will be focused on marketing and PR in the UK. And that will be in collaboration with a UK-based PR consultants called Rochester PR. So please look out for that one, and we look forward to seeing you then. Thank you very much, everyone.